All right, thank you both. Now we'll be having Q&A. So I would ask that anyone who has a question, please come down. I'll hand the mic off to you. Please keep your questions short, 1 to 2 sentences, and without saying respectful and civil. Thank you.
This is a question to Mr. Darrell. Although Christianity is the largest single religion on earth, there are many more non-Christians than there are Christians. And millions of those people are very well informed, a lot smarter than you. They've done a lot more studying than you. And yet they do not believe that the Bible is the absolute moral code, and they do not believe that Jesus is God. So does that make them wrong and you right? How? Why?
Thank you for your question. It goes back to how I opened the debate, and Dr. Avalos, even in his closing, kind of ducked. When we want to say something's verifiable, his norms aren't verifiable. No moral rule is verifiable. So to say it's something you see, taste, touch, and feel is kind of irrelevant. So when it comes to are other people wrong, well, of course we think other people. Dr. Avalos thinks I'm wrong. I think he's wrong. So of course we think other people is wrong. The issue, from my perspective, boils down to this: has God revealed himself to all these other people? And as a Christian, I have a particular view of humanity, a particular view of our nature. But one of the things, and this is one of the difficulties that everybody kind of wrestles with, the idea of the justice of God. But Romans 1:18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth of God. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. So my point simply being, I think each and every one of you here, God has given himself. He's written his law upon your heart. He's written his law, the heavens pour forth speech, and he's also ultimately revealed himself in here. Each and every one of you in here knows enough where you violated God's law, and your conscience tells you that. The issue becomes, from a Christian perspective, is how can you atone for your sins? How can you be reconciled with God? As a Christian, I'm convinced that the death, the burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ is the only way whereby we can be reconciled with God. So, in short, yes, I think other people are wrong religiously, just as they think I'm wrong. And I'm fine with that.
I have a question for Mr. Darrell. You mentioned several times the idea of wiping out the Nazis in World War II, and the fact that we typically think that's a good idea to, destroy the Nazis. However, if I remember correctly, the Nazis were a political and military organization. They did not comprise all of Germany. There were German citizens, German civilians. And do we think that that it was a good idea to wipe out German civilians back then? Was that an official policy of the United States government? If maybe my history is wrong.
Okay. Well, again, the short answer of that, trying to keep it within 2 minutes, is it comes to guilt and innocence. If there is no God, there's no real guilt, there's no real innocence. So to declare people innocent or declare people guilty is just completely arbitrary. So, but yes, when it comes to the Canaanites and God wiping them, yes, I believe God's judgment on all of them was just. This is in the flood. I think it was completely just as I think hell will ultimately be completely just. The issue boils down to, where is our code for justice? Where does that come from? And from my worldview, if our understanding of justice is solely in relation to us, let's be arbitrary for a second. You can't say I'm wrong. You can't say the Bible's wrong if our knowledge of justice and everything else is solely in relation to us. But ultimately, I believe God's the source of that, and if he's executed his judgment upon a people, I'm convinced he was right.
Thank you. This is, again, a question for Mr. Darrell. I know you're a busy guy. Again, I'm a Christian myself. I think the issue I have with your presentation is the concept of a clear and easily discernible moral law within the Bible. And this is something that Dr. Avalos pointed out very well, is that, for instance, you say whatever is in the will of God, that's what you do. Obedience to God's will. Okay, get it, but what's that will? Are you supposed to be a pacifist or not? Should you give away all your possessions? Should you not? Should you share your possessions in common? Should you not? I mean, that's communism. Is that what we should do? According to Acts 4, we should. Should we do it? You know, like, my issue is, just as Dr. Avalos is pointing out, is that same moral law that you're saying we have to have obedience to is not clear. Christians have disagreed with it again and again and again. How do you, what do you use? What hermeneutic do you use in order to figure out this is the true law of God, and this is not?
Well, I guess I'd like to piggyback on the Acts 4 thing. No, I don't think that's coerced communism. I don't think it's normative for all places, all times. Just as I think the wiping out of the Canaanites isn't a normative practice. It was something they were supposed to do at a particular point, a particular time.
What's the thing by which you determine what is good for all times and all places, and what is not?
What is good for all times and all places? My hermeneutic it's bigger than this, but again, it's going to go back. I think God, in a sense, it deals with what heaven and earth you're living in. So, for example, Adam and Eve, they're free to eat from any tree in the garden, but they were prohibited from eating from one. But once that was ruptured, there's a sense in which, and that heaven and earth fell apart, there's a sense in which that law was no longer binding upon them. And so, also with Noah, that there was a structure of a heaven and earth, and then your food changes and stuff like that. Adam was allowed to eat different things. Israel came back into the land. There's a sense in which them being restored to... But here's what I'm saying. Because it ties into my hermeneutic. So what things are binding in all places, all times? Well, obviously, I would say the shedding of innocent blood is wrong in all places and all times. And so that would be a hermeneutic. Well, it goes back to the law of God. Again, I think don't commit adultery. I'm sorry, that's clear. If you're married, you don't have sex with someone else. That's clear. Don't steal. If something doesn't belong to you, don't take it. That's clear. How is that so? I don't see that as being vague. So honor your father and your mother. Now, that's where you have to have a little bit of leeway in things, but that you can't see don't steal as being so unclear, or don't commit adultery, that's unclear.
Still fail to give a means by which we can judge. Which we can say, on the other passages and sharing our positions, those are all wishy-washy, but adultery, that's you can say any sort of criteria.
We're going to move on to the next question. Thanks.
I got a question for you too again. This is just for me trying to understand more of your response to Dr. Avalos' his points. And this debate is about the Bible being the source of morality, correct? And I was just wondering, when he pointed out Bible verses where to me, I'd see as immoral, like with slavery or killing, why, instead of defending those verses, why are you preaching that his view is meaningless or wrong because he maybe not believe in a God, or he doesn't accept those? And why don't you just defend those Bible quotes and just defend the Bible in itself?
Because what I hope to show is that we're equivocating on the term slavery. And so it's not so when he uses a term like slavery, it seems like, oh, this is so aghast. Who would ever support such a thing? But if we have it on our side, so my view on biblical slavery, especially with the Hebrews, and it was different with those who they're going to war with, but we have Gitmo and X-ray and stuff like that. So the idea that, like, if I committed a crime against you biblically, I had to restore you. I was your slave. Or if I was in debt to you, I had to pay you back. I became your slave. I don't think that's immoral. So I can defend those texts, but what I hope to do is show we have these analogs in our own system that we're not aghast about. So maybe say 500 years from now, or say 2,000 years, everyone's upset at this term prisoner, and yet they look back at our history and just say, oh, well, these people are prisoners. That's simply what my point is. So I'm not embarrassed by those laws, and I sought to show that when he asked me about always killing children or always slavery. I said, I was explicit that no, they're not always wrong. So I think those laws are good and just. Sorry for running back and forth. I thought we had another mic. Oh, okay.
Really, because I'm going to have another question for I mean, first I want to make sure I'm not misrepresenting you, Dr. Avalos. Is it your position, and is it a fair characterization of your position during the debate, that even if we adopt Mr. Darrell's position that the Bible is an absolute source for morality, we still find contradictions and we still find things that are atrocities according to the Bible?
Yes.
Okay. So, given that, I mean, I agree with your point on equivocation, and I'm glad you caught that, or that would have been my question. But all of that aside, I didn't really hear you address that much. That the claim that biblical morality is inherently contradictory. So even if we completely abandon Dr. Avalos's position on how we determine morality, epistemology, and all of that, even if we adopt your entire worldview, we still find internal contradictions.
Well, again, I don't see the flood, I don't see the wiping out of the Canaanites, I don't see the wiping out of Amalekites as an issue of an internal contradiction. I see it as an issue of justice. So the idea that it's, because basically what you want to say is, well, God can't be just. So if we have these prohibitions against, say slavery, we have these prohibitions against slavery, what should we do with somebody who we find trafficking someone through an airport here in Des Moines? Should we just say, well, don't do it next time and let them go, or should there be justice? And so that's what the issue boils down to. So it's not internally inconsistent from a Christian worldview that God judged the heavens and the earth, just as I was trying to laugh at that kid, the hermeneutic, because God judged the heavens and the earth with Adam and Eve, he judged it with Noah, and he judged it with the Israelites coming in, and ultimately, in the going in of a new heaven and a new earth, God will judge, in a sense, this heavens and this earth, and there will be a final separation of the sheep and the goats. And so, those things for many Christians are like embarrassing. I honestly, I don't have a real problem with it, because ultimately I believe that I'm convinced that God is just, and if that's what he chooses to do with his creation, I think it's a perfectly just act.
I basically just have a statement, not really a question. Doctor, you mentioned that we worship a God that we have never met. And I want to remind you of the life of Jesus Christ. He was real. We have hundreds and hundreds of witnesses. And so with that, the Bible is from eyewitness accounts. We call it historical fact. Eyewitness accounts, guys that were there, they wrote it down for the future of our generations. We can look at it that way, I believe. And so with the sense of what the gentleman said in the red shirt, how do we know what is more morality? What rules do we apply ourselves to now? We go by when Jesus came back with the new covenant, when he actually stated 9 of the 10 commandments in the New Testament, and that's the ones that we live by. He clarified adultery as in, when you lust, if I lust after this young lady right here, I'm committing adultery. I'm serious, folks. You need to think about this. This is true. If I lust after this right here, I'm committing adultery. So the answer of gay, do we care? No. The care is the sin. The hate is the sin. The hate is not the person. And that is just my statement.
First of all, the claim that there are witnesses for Jesus in the New Testament is false. There's not a single document from the time of Jesus, not one. The earliest document we have is called P52. It's from the 2nd century. And we don't have any gospel manuscripts until the 2nd and 3rd century. You have nothing from the time of Jesus. So I'm not even sure what you're talking about. There are no witnesses from that time. If there are, could you quote me a document by name from the time of Jesus around 30?
I will get your email address and I will email it to you.
What is that?
I will get your email address and I will email it to you.
Okay, great. They will announce it to the world because it's unknown.
Josephus?
Then we're going to move on to the next question. Thanks.
Right, buddy?
My question is for Mr. Darrell as well. You say that the God's absolute moral code is written on our hearts, but doesn't that in itself make absolute morality subjective and in itself?
Well, Dr. Avalos kind of closed with a similar point, but I freely confess there's a subjective element in all of our knowing. And that's why my opening comments dealt with normativity. Because what are our norms in knowing anything that's objective outside of us? Dr. Avalos's whole perspective with respect to verification sounds persuasive to some people, but it is self-refuting. So he can't even verify the verification principle, so therefore it's a self-refuting worldview. And so to hold people up to, well, where is this verifiable, and run around and tell everybody they have to verify their beliefs, when his basic epistemology isn't verifiable, he's kind of, in a sense, an intellectual hypocrite. And so when it comes to the being written upon our hearts, that's why ultimately I believe in Scripture and Revelation coming outside of us, because our sin, our selfishness, our self-interest, as Dr. Avalos would define it, distorts our moral vision, ultimately. So, but within that, yes, there's always a subjective element in our knowing, but as a Christian, I'm saying God knows. And so just as if I was to tell you to do something, if I'm your doctor and you're like, I just trust you as your doctor, sure, you have to subjectively submit to my procedures, but it doesn't mean that morality is completely subjective, or your understanding of it's completely subjective.
I have a question for you, Dr. Avalos. I really like how you talked about empathy and how that helped you create your own moral code. And you also talked about how you used to have different beliefs. What helped you change your views on this? I mean, was there a specific instance? How did you change your mind?
There was no one point of conversion. It was a very methodical study of the evidence. Remember, I started out trying to convince people that Jesus was who he claimed to be. I started out trying to convince people that the Bible was historically reliable and a divine manual for life. But after looking at the evidence very carefully, and through many years, I realized there is no evidence for the Bible's divine origin. And a lot of historicity is not there. There is no independent evidence, you know. Even Jesus, I mean, supposedly the most famous man on earth. Nobody's mentioning him around the time he's living. Why is that? But you have somebody like Pilate, or you have somebody like Caesar Augustus. Lots of people are mentioning him. So yeah, there's a dearth of evidence there. There's a lacuna in our archaeological materials that would attest to Jesus. And I should add, when he talked about my epistemology being somewhat deficient or has some infirmities, I would say that's because he didn't quote the protasis of what I said. You left out the first sentence. Did you notice that, Mr. Darrell? The protasis. No, you left out that first sentence, which includes my presupposition. And you only quoted the part after that. So next time, could you quote the whole thing, please?
Here's what the whole thing is. If you assume...
Yes, if you assume.
All right, that your five senses and logic provide reliable data about the world, then knowledge refers only. It simply doesn't follow. So I, as a Christian, believe the world gives me general senses, gives me basic knowledge about the world. But I'm not convinced it's the only knowledge I have.
I didn't say only.
Sure, so knowledge refers only.
Well, I said if you assume.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
I assume that the world around me gives me verified, like, basic reliable data.
Well, then you agree with me.
No, I don't. Only happens to verified.
I'm just saying I apply the word no to the things I most directly can see. I just don't use the word no for things that are not verifiable, that I cannot see. That's why your ethical system will always have the same problem, because it's inherent in your ethical system that claims about who speaks for God will always be controversial. You cannot verify that. That's why you stick to things that you can prove, instead of relying on people who tell you that God is speaking to them. How would I know? Isn't it better to guide your life by things you can actually prove are there? For example, in conflict, we can verify that there's not enough water or not enough oil. How do we verify that you are representing God's thoughts? How do we do that?
That's against the scripture.
Yeah, but all you're taking is, you're regressing the same question one step further. How do we know that the biblical authors were speaking for God? So it comes back to you. If you judge who speaks for God.
Oh, no, I would say it's internally consistent. However, again, that's why my opening argument dealt with the nature of norms. You need...
Did you judge who speaks for God or not? Did you judge who speaks for God or not? No? Then how did you judge that those authors spoke for God? Self-authenticating, like Muhammad is self-authenticating? Then what makes something self-authenticating? Like genocide would make it self-authenticating? Well, because it's a value judgment, and value judgments are not the same as epistemic judgments. You know, the judgment, this table is here, it's not the same as homosexuality is wrong. That's not an epistemic judgment. That is a value judgment, and there's a difference.
Can we
You
move on to the
create a
next
human
question,
being-
please? I assure you I would like to hear this as much as anyone, but we're going to get this last question in.
I hate to break this up. Someone shouted Josephus from the back of the room. I think I know why that's not credible, but if
Not at all. Josephus, most people don't know. The manuscripts of Josephus are from the Middle Ages. All the manuscripts we have of Josephus, even though he was writing about the 1st century, are from the Middle Ages. So we don't know what Christians interpolated into Josephus. If you read almost any historical Jesus critical study, even by Christians, they'll tell you, yeah, one of the problems with Josephus is the manuscripts are late. They're not from the time of Jesus.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions?
This is for Mr. Darrell. Wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. You mentioned that the shedding of innocent blood is absolutely wrong earlier. I'm wondering, why isn't the crucifixion of Jesus in direct contradiction of this? If God made an exception, isn't it therefore relative, not absolute?
I would say as a substitute for the sins of the world, there's a sense in which he was guilty. So I don't see it as internally inconsistent, because his blood was shed. He became a sinner on the cross. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? He became the greatest sinner of all time, and so our sins were imputed to him and became a substitute on our behalf. So there's a sense in which his blood was not innocent.
Hi there. This is sort of a question for both, sort of along the lines of a statement as well, and almost more directed at you, Mr. Darrell. Not to do that again. I'm sorry. I apologize. But I'm a Christian myself, and I understand that everyone is that people love having absolutes and these certainties, and that's that's important in life, I suppose. But in my personal Christianity, I think it's really one of the coolest parts about Christianity is how much of a mystery it all is. And sometimes, this may sound like a cop-out to some people, like, well, I don't have to understand anything. But I don't really see it as that, as much as one of the most, I read a quote somewhere the other day that said, if you understand God, he's not God. And that was really cool to me, because I think if we are going to call someone the creator of the universe, and this idea that as Christians, I think it's more about relationship than religion, as opposed to that, because I think it's more about that. And would you agree with that in this sense, and could you explain that a little more, instead of focusing so much on these absolutes and things like that, and truths and whatnot, because I know that's important. But I really love the idea that things can't be understood and explained all the time.
Yes, as a Christian, I readily admit, my argument tonight is not that I understand all things, or that my knowledge of God's exhaustive, my knowledge of the will of God is exhaustive. But within that, I'm not afraid of the idea that Christianity is a religion. Sure, I have a relationship with the living God, but the way you have a relationship with somebody, like when you say, it depends on what you mean on, I think I might understand what you mean when you say things like, if you understand God, you don't really know God, or if that was the right quote. Is that what it was? Or if you know... Okay, but there are definitely things we have to know about him. So even, for example, if you have a spouse, they can be somewhat mysterious to you, but they're definitely describable, their desires are definitely knowable, their wills are knowable, at least maybe not exhaustively. So when it comes to God, I definitely don't know him exhaustively, so that's not my point, but I definitely think that, and here we are as Christians, one of the reasons we must maintain the idea that there are absolutes and God's character is absolute, is what do we do when God sends people to hell? Do we just say, well, maybe that's not a part of God? Well, we've actually transgressed his holy character. We've transgressed his absolute character. So the reason absolutes are important isn't just from, kind of arbitrarily or anything like that, but the very way we have any relationship includes rules, includes obligations, includes duties. As even I read in my opener, the very nature of a norm are duties to individuals and to persons. So just as I'm obligated to love you and everything else, but you can still be mysterious to me. So I don't seek to negate that in what I was saying tonight.
I got a question for you, Dr. Avalos. You mentioned when the gentleman came down here about historical criticism of the New Testament text, and you were, I don't want to misquote you, but you were generally not convinced of the historical evidences, because you mentioned that we didn't have copies until the later 2nd century. I'm wondering, with the New Testament, the fact that within the first 300 years of its completion, we have, about 124 manuscripts, I believe. Do you apply that same amount of criticism that you do to the New Testament texts to other texts of ancient history?
Yes, I do.
So can you trust any ancient history, then, is be my
Not all the time. It depends on whether it's independently corroborated, and that's the difference. So things that are independently corroborated, you can trust more than things that are not. Nobody's mentioning Jesus around 30 when he's living. People are mentioning, like thousands of people are mentioning Caesar Augustus. There are letters to and from Caesar Augustus. There are monuments to Caesar Augustus. There are tax receipts concerning Caesar Augustus. Nothing like that for Jesus. See? Well, the whole Christian church comes later, though. I mean, that's not historical evidence. It has to be from the time that you're talking about. I mean, otherwise, better at best it would be Mormonism. I mean, within the last 200 years, lots of documents. Does that make Mormonism true? Would you say, well, we have a lot of evidence showing that Joseph Smith existed? Does that make his claims true? No. So even if you had videotape of Jesus saying, I'm the Son of God, it would not make it true. That's another thing that people don't understand.
Hi, this question is for Darrell. It's my understanding that God had this important message to spread to humanity. My question to you is, why was writing a book the best way to spread that message in a primitive time where people couldn't have a civilization, where we couldn't study evidence? Why was writing a book at that time the best way to spread that message?
Going back to the young man's mystery element, now why God has chosen to do exactly what he does, I won't necessarily presume to know. I have no special privilege to exactly why God created the heavens and the earth, aside from, I can paint broadly for his own glory and stuff like that. But I would say it wasn't solely that he revealed himself in a book, he revealed himself in a person. And this is one of the important things, like Dr. Avalos is right, and here's one of the important things with our epistemology. Even if we have videotape of Jesus Christ saying he's the Son of God, even if we have videotape of him rising from the dead, it doesn't necessitate, therefore, he is divine or the true and living God, because strange things happen in history all the time, and we could just pawn up. So that's why it's an epistemological issue at the end of the day. So why did God do that? I have no idea. Why does he choose to send me out on college campuses to preach the gospel? I have no idea. But that's the means that he has chosen to use. And so it's, it's not much of an answer, but I don't think that's been revealed, so I won't presume to know.
This is for Dr. Avalos. Are you planning on a retirement in the near future?
No.
Are you planning on a vacation sometime in the near future?
No.
Do you have any plans for the future whatsoever?
Yes.
So, can you verify that you'll be here?
No, but it's...
So you're still living on faith based upon something you can't verify, is that correct?
I believe in induction works. And on the basis of induction, I cannot guarantee, but I'm not claiming that I know that. I use properly the word know. I only use the word know for things I can directly verify. So you're not even quoting what I'm saying. I do not use the word know that way. I would use the word believe that way. I believe that I might be here, 2-3 days from now. I don't say I know that. So my definition of verification is not what you are representing.
I have more to that, but they're going to take the mic away from me. I'd like Mr. Darrell to please respond to that based on Christian faith for people who do not know everything but still believe.
It should be very clear we can't know everything. And even, again, it keeps going back to the epistemological issue. The reality of it is, I think if we take Dr. Avalos's verification principle seriously, we can't know anything of history. Because what he said is we have to establish it or corroborate it by independent sources and independent evidence. But then we'd have to corroborate that, we'd have to corroborate that. In his history of archaeology. He doesn't really establish why this is unavoidable. I'm going to butcher this guy's name, but it says, as Wind Shuttle notes with disapproval, Karl Popper has argued that verifying such a historical event is impossible because verification would require an infinite regress of claims and sources. The next page he says, my own positivistic approach requires that we regard a witness as reliable when the reliability has been verified. How in the world would I verify that anybody way back when was reliable? We're in an infinite regress if we take this history serious. That's why it is an epistemological debate tonight over how we know anything. And the reality is, and what we have is kind of a scorched earth policy. Dr. Avalos, I have this war on God. If it means I scorch the earth with all the past, I scorch the earth with all the future, because he says he goes on induction, but he also tells us that, as I quoted in my debate, there is no logical reason why the sun should rise in the east the next time. So if there's no reason for that, like planning for anything in the future, he can't logically know that, let alone build an ethic and everything else on known consequences, as I mentioned in the debate. So if he's going to base on the induction, which he can't empirically verify, again, it's kind of, I hope you can see the epistemological issue more so than the sympathy issue, because the epistemology is really where the debate's at. Would you like to respond?
I'd like to comment on that. He misrepresents induction. The difference between my view of induction and his. My form of induction starts with verifiable processes and items. I can verify that things burn when put in fire. That's a known process. And I can then induce that something that looks burned might have been in a fire. I can verify that people can die when they're shot. And so I can induce that perhaps a dead body with holes in it might have been the victim of a shotgun or a gun. Your process of induction begins with the first items not being verifiable at all. You start with God. Where did you verify that it existed? How do you induce something from something not known? I start my induction with things that are known. You start your induction with things that are not known. That's the difference. That's a very big difference.
Well, real quick, he's simply begging the question on induction to go with the idea that, well, I base it on verifiable evidence. The question about induction is, how do we know that there's a uniform nature? How do we know tomorrow is going to be like today? He can't say, well, I verified it. He can say I verified the past, but the question with induction is, how do we know the future is going to be like the past? That's the issue with induction. Since he doesn't know the future and he can't verify the future, as he says, there's no logical reason to think the sun's going to rise in the east tomorrow. He can't know anything about the future. So to say I've started with verifiable evidence is simply to beg.
In circumpolar regions, the sun does not rise in the east all the time.
What's that?
Are you aware that in the circumpolar regions of the Earth, the sun does not rise in the east every day?
All right, well, that's fine. I'm going to move to the next question. Thank you.
This question is presented to both presenters. The mere fact that there's so many different factions within the actual Christian belief, doesn't that not undermine your argument, Mr. Darrell? And the fact that there are so many different denominations of Christianity, and the fact that several of them are actually self-refuting in themselves, saying that, no, this Christianity is wrong, no, this Christianity is wrong. Isn't that not in itself actually against your argument in saying that it comes from that the absolute morality comes from the Bible, and the fact that the group of people that actually follow the Bible are in a sense saying that the other factions within that same group are wrong?
Well, what it may do is negate against maybe Christian love. What it may do is negate against Christian charity. But when I disagree with another Christian, I don't assume we're both right. I assume one of us is wrong, or maybe we're both wrong. But ultimately, the Christian view of unity is hopefully based upon love. Not because no two individuals are going to agree on any single, or maybe a few facts here and there, but as far as a totality of our experiences and a totality of our beliefs, even having gone to the Atheist Agnostic Society a few times, it's not that you guys all agree on everything else and blah, blah, blah. So our unity is hopefully not based upon, agreeing to all the same facts. But what we do have is a source document whereby we can debate the things through and everything else. And again, I freely admit there is a subjective element to all of our knowledge and all of our lives. And so I'm not afraid of subjectivity, but ultimately, in knowing anything, you still need a norm. So what is that norm whereby we know anything? It's not empirically verifiable. And since it's not verifiable, a norm itself is not verifiable, we can't appeal to only that which is empirically verifiable. So as Christians, it's unfortunate that we're divided and everything else, but we definitely don't think, well, we're both right or we're both whatever. We still think individuals have interpreted something wrong or wrong on something.
Okay, I got to segue into my question here a little bit. I'm glad you answered the question, the last question the way you did, because it segues nice into this one. I think we can all assume or operate under the assumption that the holy books we have today, the Bible for example, are a product of the one true creator of the universe. I think that's the assumption that the religious people who believe in those books make. Now, these books are dictated either directly or through some agent of that deity to humanity. And operating under the premise of the debate, which is the Bible is the absolute source for absolute moral principles that we can use today. Let's see, where was I going here? My notes are terrible. And I realize accounting for mistranslations, word of mouth, and intentional changes made to the scriptures throughout the years, let's operate that under the premise of the debate, which is the Bible that we have today is the source for the absolute moral principles that we can use. Why, then, is there so much disagreement within the different sects of particular religions on those absolute moral principles? Why wasn't it made perfectly clear by that deity what those moral principles were? It seems like a lot of work to go through. I mean, yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, the issue of slavery. I mean, I know that was pounded pretty hard in the debate, but there are Bible verses that say you can keep slaves, and there are Bible verses like the one you quoted that said you cannot keep slaves. I mean, why go through all this work to create a book, pass it down through generations, to have these moral principles not be explicitly clear?
Good question. Well, it ties, again, there's a bunch there to unpack. Like, generally speaking, for the most part, I think I know every Christian group that, again, fully affirms slavery. I don't know of a single Christian out there that wants to empty the prison system. So that's where, like, we have to realize when we throw out terms like slavery or whatever it is, we're equivocating. But Christians all over that I'm aware of oppose kidnapping. I have yet to meet a single Christian, or if I have, I would say you're a hypocrite if you're kidnapping people and stuff like that. So, and because I think we have a standard whereby we say, well, here's stealing individuals are wrong, selling them's wrong. So again, when it comes to slavery, realize we're equivocating on the term. And I think when we read back an ancient document that's not afraid to use slavery for a myriad of things, and then we go back and we read that term, we're like, oh, well, how heinous to use the term slavery. It's more kind of actually shallow thinking on our part that just because the word slavery is there, somehow we're morally aghast. And so, for the most part, to be honest, like maybe some abortion issues or some Christians I would disagree with. For the most part, like I think 1 minute. So so there's those sorts of things. But honestly, like most of the Christians, maybe I've just narrowed myself into a little corner. We have differences, but they're not that major. No different than any in a sense any other group. And so you have to have this. There's a sense in which they're broad, and yet they're also explicitly applicable. So, for example, "thou shalt not kill" is a very broad term relating to the shedding of innocent blood. But then it goes on to qualify it throughout Exodus and everything else, saying here's an instance where if the axe comes off and hits somebody, they're allowed to flee or whatever it may be. So you have, so the issue becomes a lot of Christians I don't think take the Old Testament seriously in reading the Bible. And then from there, to be honest, you have the subjective element where people just want to be sinful. And so they want to twist the Word of God. Is that sufficient?
Well, I was kind of getting to, you said that there's qualifications to these moral principles. If they're absolute, why do they require qualifications?
Because the nature, and again, it ties into, so for example, if I was just, again, if I think there's a summary law, so for example, even don't commit adultery, there's a sense in which we can all agree that that is a man and a woman, but then it goes on, and I think more broadly, even though that term deals with a man and woman in marriage, we generally apply that, I think it applies to all the sexual norms. Don't sleep with a beast, don't have homosexual sex, don't, whatever the other sexual things that it opposes. So the fact that you have this broad term and then it goes on to qualify it, I think it helps us give some specificity with respect to it, because you run into the question, don't steal. All right, well, I've just stolen from you. What do we in turn do? Is there, and it goes back to the issue of justice in light of those laws. And so that's where I think the kind of the issue ties in.
If I can just add one sentence here. All he said is perfectly consistent with a book that is a human product, and you would expect that it would have all those inconsistencies and qualifications. It's perfectly consistent with a human product, not a divine product.
All right, we have time for one more question.
Okay, would you agree that for the majority of people, the religion that they choose to believe in and affirm and push up would be the religion that they were raised in?
Perhaps, yeah.
Okay, so you believing in Christianity and affirming it is not necessarily that you believe it's God's word, but you were raised within Christianity, and losing it would be actually losing a part of yourself and losing a part of your identity. So would you say that your dogmatic belief in Christianity and you're upholding it and pushing it onto other people is actually you trying to reaffirm part of yourself?
I guess if we had a psychologist that could analyze me and figure out if that's the case or not. But my story is actually the opposite of Dr. Avalos. Is he was much more like, I grew up in a very liberal Episcopal home that really had no beliefs about the Bible. I remember being little, asking the priest about the Bible. He says it's just a bunch of stories, and basically how I came to know the Lord is I saw myself as being sinful. I told myself, you know what, I had a friend of mine commit suicide. I said, you know what, I want to be a good person. In light of Ben's death, I'm going to go commit myself to be a good person. But I found myself full of lust. I found myself full of greed. I found myself full of selfishness. And so it wasn't that I was running to the Bible to confirm my dogmatic past. In fact, when I went to the scriptures, I tried transcendental meditation, sitting on the edge of my bed and trying to become one with the cosmos and stuff like that. And but it was like in reading the scriptures that ultimately I was in part convicted of sin, violating God's norms, but also within that I saw the grace and mercy of God. So we could argue that, or on the flip side, we can argue that here we are in America and science is a norm, and so that's why people are becoming more atheistic or whatever we want to say, or secular and blah, 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 blah. And so if it's a cultural argument against me, the response is, well, you guys are in a culture as well that might be in a trajectory against Christianity. You're kind of in this environment, so you either just want to be rebellious against your parents or whatever it may be. We can psychologize our debate, why we do what we do all day long, and there's a myriad of factors that go into it. Ultimately, I believe that God's completely sovereign over my life, and if he conditioned me in an environment, even Acts 17, he says he placed all people in all places that they might reach out and seek him. So sure, God's placed me in this environment that I may find him.
So did your search for the truth start and stop with the Bible, or did you expand to the Quran, Buddhism, Hinduism? Did you look at all of those the same way that you examine the Bible?
In a sense, yes and no. So like I said, I was doing transcendental meditation first. I got some sort of book, and I was actually so confused. I was reading Nation of Islam literature. I was getting some Farrakhan material and thinking about selling bean pods and stuff like that, but didn't really work out. So it was kind of like I was examining other worldviews, looking at other things. And at the end of the day, this is going to be disappointing to some. At the end of the day, your conversion is subjective. It's the Holy Spirit changing someone's heart. And so I'll freely admit, at the end, there is that subjective element that has gone into my life that, there's a sense in which, as I quoted Ayer, that from sensible objects you can't go to super sensible things. So I freely confess there was the work of the Holy Spirit upon my heart that converted me and changed me and everything else. And I realize it's going to be subjective for some of you and not satisfying. But ultimately, I would attribute my conversion just as Lazarus was dead in his tomb. Jesus called him out. I was dead in my tomb, and Jesus called me out.
All right, thank you both, Mr. Darrell, Dr. Avalos, for a wonderful debate. Let's give them all a round of applause.